Welcome to another Friday episode of the Wake Up Call. Uh, I don't know if you guys heard my phone is blowing up. I don't know if you guys have heard, but Don Lemon was just arrested, and of course, the group chat is going crazy. Everybody is upset for Don Lemon. People are asking, "Well, are you worried?" Good morning, Luana. Uh, and I'm not necessarily like to me. I know that I've always said everything is 50-50. Either it'll happen or it won't. And what are you gonna do? Like be quiet? That ain't gonna save you. So, good morning, Carmelita. Good morning, Texted Beauty Brief. And the fact that they arrested Don Lemon is interesting because Trump has always had this beef with Don Lemon for years, and he's just going after his enemies. And the thing about when people don't like you, right? Like the thing that people don't understand about Trump or about journalists or about people in general is that like when people are doing their work and doing their job, like it ain't no personal thing with you. Carmelita's talking about say I'm your sister. Hey sister Carmelita. But she does say hey brother. Anyway, it's like it's not that people have a beef with Trump. Trump has a beef with people who criticize them. Like Don Lemon will criticize Trump and he'll criticize like Stephen A. Smith. It's not a personal thing, but the other thing is, right, this is where we are now. Well, this is where we were 6 months ago. Well, where we were a year ago. And this is what we were saying, right? That we were in authoritarianism, we were in fascism. And I keep wondering, what do people see or what do people have that tells them that we're not? Because everybody's hair should be on fire. And the problem is it's not, right? And I've been thinking about this lately, like who, who are we talking to? Who are we trying to convince? And I've been reading a lot about the civil rights movement, about Black movements in general, writing about them for a book. And I realized that they were never trying to convince like segregationists and Jim Crow people to come over to their side and embrace equality because that's a fruitless mission. But most people just don't do anything, right? Most people just don't care. Those people in Minnesota are not people who were Trump voters. Most of them, 99% of them, were not Trump voters who saw what Trump was doing and then switched to the other side. All of those people were the people who were standing up to Trump or were on the side against Trump anyway. And a lot of times we are addressing a side that is like talking to a brick wall. Some of them are never, ever, 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 ever going to see our humanity. Some of them are never going to be on our side. And I'm tired of seeing Black people, Black intellectuals, Black people who really have a cause waste gallons of ink and air and oxygen trying to convince people of their humanity who can never be convinced. And the same is true about today in that, like, we all we got. Like, if the people in this room, if the people who are already on our side can be chilled by seeing Trump arrest Don Lemon, then he wins. What they're going to do to us, they're going to do to us. They don't want us to exist. And there's nothing you can do for them except die. I mean, that's, if we're being honest, there's nothing else we can do. Someone asked me, "Oh, am I familiar with Propaganda by Alex Krasenstance? Any comments and stuff?" I haven't read that particular book, but I have actually written about and talked about propaganda. As a matter of fact, I mean, I don't want to pop my collar, but I was in the piece that I was nominated for an Emmy for is called Propaganda. We did a show, an episode. I used to write for Amber Ruffin's show, and I did a segment called "How Did We Get Here?" And I wrote about propaganda. And what, if you don't know what propaganda is, it is the history, it is the ongoing, it's the biggest, I called it the biggest marketing campaign in history. And it is the idea that cops protect people, that cops, we got the TV show, every TV show that you see about cops, they treat the rogue cop as the bad cop or the outlier, and cops are brave and cops are, decent human beings and they really want to save you, and they don't. It's just a job, and it's one of those jobs that attracts, in fact, the worst kinds of people. You don't know any garbage men that ever killed anybody, that ever shot anybody. You don't know any cashiers at Walmart who throw people on the ground when they don't like them. When somebody has the correct change, doesn't have the correct change, your cashier doesn't throw them on the ground and handcuff them or kick them or call the rest of the cashiers to beat them up. And the same is true with propaganda, because what propaganda gets us to do is, for one, to respect the police and believe it's a noble profession. And the reason that's important is because what these ICE officers have done is inherit the legacy of this propaganda, right? We see them as cops. They give them badges. They wear, the big vests. Like somebody said that they dress like the cast of the Dirty D. And if you are Black, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the Dirty D. All the cops on the Dirty D just have that black vest that say police. But propaganda is what makes us believe that. That is a thing to be inherent. There's really no law that distinguishes between what a cop can do and what you can do. Right? When cops say they shot somebody out of fear, there's not a law that says cops get to say they feared for their lives. If you shoot someone or out of fear, you can say you should fear for your life, but the court won't give you the same leniency that they give cops. Prosecutors don't press charges against cops like they do the rest of us. And propaganda, so I don't know why they sent me down this rabbit hole. So I'll tell you how propaganda started. I've actually researched this issue, and which is why I wrote that How Did We Get Here on it. And you can look it up on YouTube. Just Google How Did We Get Here Amber Ruffin propaganda. So it starts actually with the cowboy, when the American film industry stole the image of the cowboy from Black people. The first noble thing was the cowboy, right? The noble image, the noble symbol of America. And every culture has their noble symbol, right? It is always a male figure that is the noble image of this culture. If you talk about Japanese culture, what is it? The samurai, this lone warrior, right? If you talk about, English culture, it's the knight, this lone warrior. If you talk about any culture, like even Christianity, right? Like, what was David? This lone farmer who was out tending the sheep when they called him, I need you to come get this big ass giant and knock his ass out, right? He grabbed his 6-shooter, pea shooter, and went and fought. I mean, even Superman. Superman is just alien cop, right? They're warriors for the state. And what so when TV started, like literally when TV started, they first did the first image that they used was the Lone Ranger, who was actually a black man who was patterned after a black man, Bass Reeves. He was this huge star. And then they said, well, we need something that's up to date. Like, we can't keep doing these period pieces because, like, skyscrapers are being built and we can't, there are very few places that we can shoot. So they created this show called Dragnet. And Dragnet was essentially a show about cowboys in police uniforms. Because again, remember this, the cowboys eventually evolved into sheriffs. And the interesting thing about Dragnet is what they did is they didn't like come up with the story. They just created a cowboy story, but with Dragnet, so that they could have stories, they got a dude who was recently fired from the LAPD for beating up a bunch of black people on Christmas morning. And they had moved him into like the PR department. So they didn't take as bad. They didn't fire him. And Dragnet asked him to be a consultant on the show. And he was like, okay, I got to get permission from my bosses. And they agreed on the condition that the Los Angeles Police Department could get approval on every script on Dragnet. And that's how propaganda began. And so every police show that you've ever watched, somebody said Hill Street Blues, which is wild because like some of y'all ain't old enough to remember Hill Street Blues. Hill Street Blues, Starsky and Hutch, Chip, all of that stuff, everything you see today, it is just a version of Dragnet. And that's why we believe so much about cops. That's why you believe, one, that cops stop crime. Cops don't stop crime. You know what percentage of cops of crimes police solve every year? Like 1% to 2%. You and I could solve 1% to 2% of crimes if like no cops existed, right? That's why when people were pushing back against the defund the police, I always ask them, what do you think the police do? Do cops keep you safe? Well, if you're white, maybe. If you're black, statistics show you're more likely to be in danger after a police encounter than if you were like in the worst neighborhood in your state. They don't keep you safe. They don't solve crimes, and they don't prevent crimes, right? So there's statistics that show, like, for instance, if you have 10,000 cops in your city, if you increase the number to 10 to 15,000, there's not a corresponding drop in crime. Like, they don't prevent crime, they don't keep you safe, and they don't solve crime, right? And when people hear that, they say, well, you're anti-police. Nah, just anti-ineffectual things, right? But when we're talking about these ICE officers, they inherited all that. They inherited that reverence that we have because of propaganda. And they're out there wearing, like, why does a federal agent arresting immigrants? First of all, like, only 5% of the immigrants they have detained have been convicted of violent crimes. Why does a federal agent need a bulletproof vest? Like, why do they need a submachine gun? They're going to the same communities that regular cops go. They're going into the same communities that like you live in, but they can do it because of propaganda. Like the only reason to have a gun is to shoot somebody. But as far as this Don Lemon thing is concerned, man, like it's not any more concerning to me than it should be for you. The, Don Lemon may be higher profile, but they are trying to chill. The reason they are arresting Don King is not because Don King is going to single-handedly bring down the Trump presidency. It's because they scared of y'all, not Don King. They're afraid of y'all, right? They're afraid that we could do something. Don King might inspire us, you, me, everybody else to do something. And we see it, right? Because the thing that we're seeing with this Trump administration is that one, like, I've been warned about saying this word, but there is no other apt description for it. They bitch ass niggas, right? Like the Trump administration, every time they face a challenge, I'm sorry if I said Don King, I meant Don Lemon. I'm sorry, y'all. But that is funny, though, equating Don King with Don Lemon. I think Don Lemon has a better haircut. But when we talk about the Trump administration, every time they like face pushback, they capitulate. Think about what happened in Minnesota, just like people getting out in the streets and protesting. They'd be like, you know what, we'll talk to Tim Walz and we'll fire Dan Bovino. Like we'll chill out a little bit. Because they were scared. They're scared of y'all, man. They're not scared of Don Lemon. Now y'all got me wanting to say Don King. They're not afraid of Don Lemon or Don King. They're not afraid of either one of them. Right. I think Don Lemon might be a little bit more frightening to them than Don King. But somebody, Eva said they can arrest Don King if they want to. She won't mind. But yeah, man. So shout out to Don Lemon. Shout out to y'all. Again, they're not afraid of Don Lemon. They're afraid of you guys. And that's why they target journalists. That's why they target truth tellers, right? Like, you think about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was scary to them, not because like Martin Luther King was going to convince LBJ single-handedly to create a Civil Rights Act or a Voting Rights Act. What was scary about Martin Luther King was that they looked out that window at the March on Washington. They looked at these protests in Selma. They looked at these protests in Atlanta and on these college campuses, and they said, whoa, look at all those people. Like, remember that scene in Malcolm X where they said no one man should have all that power? That's what was scary about them. Y'all, us. That is where the power is. That is what they fear. And the reason they do this is to scare people like y'all. To quell dissent. You know, again, I've been writing about these kinds of movements for the past few months. And some of the people like that y'all don't know about, I've been kind of studying. So, for instance, right, I think one of the people that, you know, we never talk about are the black people who were with John Brown. Like, I think even when we talk about them, we think that John Brown convinced some dudes that, you know, slavery was bad, convinced some black people that slavery was bad. And they went with him. So, but it wasn't like that. Like a lot of these people were like more down than John Brown. Um, Hold on, I want to look up get this name right. So I can tell y'all this story that I was reading the other day. Well, just yesterday, right? Like, because it blew my mind, right? And what blew my mind is who hold on. You'll just you'll hear this story and it'll blow your mind too. So when John Brown um when John Brown was arrested, right? He was hold on 1 second and let me get this name right. And oh gosh, I gotta find it. But anyway, when John Brown was arrested, you know, there was some people got away. Some people were killed during the raid, like Shields Green. And this is what made me think of the story, right? Shields Green was arrested. He was with John Brown, and they called him Emperor Shields Green. And Shields Green was actually just like chilling, right? Like he just hated enslavers, and he actually lived with Frederick Douglass. And when Frederick Douglass and John Brown met like a few days before the raid, he said, "Hey, Shields, if you want to go with him, you can go." And Shields was like, "Hell yeah. I mean, kill some white folks." Right. And so he went with John Brown. And when they arrested Shields Green and put him in jail, they said that he didn't write any letters. He didn't, write any letters to his loved ones. And they theorized that it was because he was, he was, they said he was very illiterate, right? Um, and I always wondered, like, how do they know who was illiterate, right? Like, John Harper's Ferry raids took place in Virginia, where it was illegal for Black people to read. So, like, we always think we know which Black people could read, and you have to ask yourself, why do they think that? Like, if you made it illegal to read, why do you think you know if Black people could read, which Black people could read, and how many Black people could read? Like, for instance, when we talk about slave literacy rates, one of the things I always point out, like, well, there's no way to know. But one thing that lives in the white imagination is that if you think that enslaved people could read, to me, couldn't read, it is a crazy thing to think that all of these different states and all of these different legislators got together and they wrote laws against slaves reading if slaves weren't trying to read, if slaves didn't care about educating themselves. That's an absurd thing to believe. The town that I live in, right? Some of you know that I live in a house I live essentially on was a plantation. And the plantation is I live in the house that started the town. So this family moved from South Carolina to Georgia in 1830. They were one of the richest families in South Carolina. Their families bought up all of the land from the land lottery. So Georgia was going to have a land lottery after they kicked the natives off the land, and they were going to have these lottery tickets. Well, they were going to give the lottery tickets to the poor, indigent, and the wives of veterans, right? Wives of deceased veterans. But you think about it, right? Back then, if you didn't have slaves, there was no use in you getting all this free land. Like, who was going to work this land if you were a widow of a veteran, right? So what this white family did is they figured that out, and they sent their son to Georgia and say, "Hey, buy up all of those land, buy as many as you can, and we're going to move our family to Georgia." And so he went down, he bought up a bunch of land lottery tickets, got 1,700 acres, which is like the size, a little bit bigger than Harlem. But their family had gotten like 1.7 million acres in head rights alone based on how many slaves they owned. So he got him, his wife, 4 daughters, and 88 of the people they enslaved and moved to Georgia by himself. And anyway, this was 1834. So, within a generation, the Civil War happened. And of course, they were surrounded by black people. So the town is basically all black now. But there was one of the people he enslaved that was enslaved, like literally where I'm talking to you from, was a woman. And when emancipation happened, the story goes that the slave masters had taught her how to read. She was the only slave that could read. And so they sent her to Connecticut to get some more education. And then she went to Spelman, came back here, started the black school. And this school was the black school until 2000, right? And in 2000, they built another school and closed the schoolhouse down, and they created this museum. And the museum is wild because it is literally the history of every black family in this town, like this whole black town. So I was talking to someone about this woman who had built this school, and they tell me this story about, she had nice slave masters, and, they taught her how to read. And, she went to, she was the only one who knew how to read, and they told me the whole story, right? And I said, that's a crazy story to believe. Like, that is an absurd thing to believe, that there was a girl, just think about this now. Again, this is the delusion of whiteness, that there was a little girl who learned how to read. The slave masters, first of all, remember what I said about the story. A man, his wife, and 4 little girls moved to this town and built the house that I live in. Like, they're still standing 200 years later. And they think the slaves who built that house, could not read. First of all, that's an absurd thing to believe, right? That is a wild assumption to make. That's like, is literally impossible to believe unless you just have been brainwashed by whiteness. It is so absurd. And then they taught this little girl how to read, right? First of all, who took care of the kids, the slaves? Why do white kids can read? Who taught the white kids how to read? You know who taught the white kids how to read. But anyway, they taught this little black girl how to read. And we're supposed to believe, like, she went back to the slave cabin with all the 80-something other black people every night and said, "Nah, I'm not going to teach y'all how to read." That's wild. Like, that is an absurd, crazy thing to believe, right? That is just something some white people said. And the reason they tell us these bits is the same reason they arrested Don Lemon. I'm sorry. See, y'all did this. The same reason they arrested Don Lemon. It is because they know that their cruelty, that their systems depend on our compliance. That's the only way any of this could exist. Like, the only way that you would tolerate, like, just a bunch of dudes in black vests and guns coming into your neighborhood and just pulling people out of their houses, some of them immigrants, some of them not. You don't know. But the only reason you would tolerate that is because they embedded you with a respect for the police. Like, you were taught to respect the men who were doing this. That's propaganda. And propaganda is just the same propaganda that they use in slavery, because these people are descended from the institution of cops, descended from slave catchers, descended from the people who said, "We will arrest you, or maybe we'll kill you if you learn how to read." So it's easy to believe that cops protect you, just like it's easy to believe, like, black people couldn't read before 1865, most of them. And then after 1865, like, most of them could read. It's an absurd, 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 absurd thing to believe. There's this study that was done by this guy, and I met him in 2000, who he just wanted to know, when you talk about Reconstruction violence, he just wanted to know not the people, but what damage did they do to black buildings? I just want to know. Like, he was a researcher of historical architecture, right? And so he did the study, and it turned out that, like, he counted, and this was 2000, when, like, not that much stuff was on the internet, and he found 631 schools. 10% of all the black schools in America were burned down in a 10-year period between 1868 and 1878. 10% of the schools. And you don't enact a campaign like that if you don't think, like, black people value education, or that, like, they're not educated. One of the things that we always forget is that most black people were not educated at state institutions. You talk about HBCUs; those were institutions that we built ourselves because they would not allow us to go to their institutions. But we forget about the K-2 through 12 schools, right? Like, most of the people in the South, which is where 90% of the black people lived before the 1940, did not go to state-sponsored schools. First of all, a third of the black students in the rural South were educated at Rosenwald schools. So these schools were built with a combination. You can go look at the story on Contraband Camp, a combination of public, of philanthropic and community funds. So in these, we talk about, like, we think there were black schools and white schools, black public schools and white schools. And in most cases, there weren't. There were white schools and then schools that black people built. My mother went to a boarding school in South Carolina called Mather Academy. And it was built, like, right after emancipation to educate enslaved people, freed slaves. And the Stevie Wonder's first wife went there. Jim Clyburn went there. So, like, she went to high school, to this boarding school with, like, Jim Clyburn. And we forget that most of these schools across America were built by black people, not like state funds. They were in churches. The woman, Sarah Mae Fleming, who had the first bus boycott, she attended a school that was built by her church. Right? Many of the people that you talk about, all of the Medgar Evers in Mound Bayou, that was a community that was built by black people. That's where Jesse Jackson was mentored at, in Mound Bayou. Most of the black people were attended before the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, attended schools that were built and maintained by black people. That is what Brown versus Board of Education did, right? Not necessarily say, well, we're going to combine this black public school and this white public school. Like, it did that in places like Boston and other places, right? But in most of the places, black people had no public schools. There were schools, they attended schools that were built by themselves. It wasn't until the 1930s that South Carolina said that we're going to start building public schools, right? Claudette Colvin, right? Claudette Colvin, who died last week, went to school in a one-bedroom schoolhouse, right? We're not talking about generations and generations and generations ago. I'm talking about my mama. I'm talking about Claudette Colvin. Like, the Montessori school, the Rosenwald school, in my community and the school district now that I grew up in, those schools are still standing. Right? They were open when I was in elementary school. My school district desegregated in 1993. The town where I grew up in, the school district desegregated in 1993. So the idea that they know anything about Black people's education or how we value education when there has never been a nanosecond in American history where Black people got to attend equal schools is wild. I don't know if it is just me or the camera. Is my share just like slowly going down and down and down and down and down? But yeah, man, like we're in this place now where we're going to have to return to that ethos of not just like, I know we like to call it self-determination, but like that Black people's existence is a product of our self-determination. Right? Like this country has never en masse done anything for Black people. Right? But I think we have to return to self-protection. So when you talk about those 631 Black schools and all those churches that were burned down, right? You don't enact that kind of campaign. You don't restrict Black people's schools. You don't target DEI. You don't target affirmative action if you don't know already. The fear is that Black people will surpass you because they educated themselves. Their fear is you guys in this chat. I always point out, like, I think I talked about this a couple years ago. You ever notice why, like, the Black church, if you're a Baptist or you're a Methodist, like, Black church is always Second Baptist, Second Methodist. And that's not because of segregation. In some cases it is, right? But in many cases, those Second Baptists, those second churches were the product of when Black people were enslaved. They had to mandatorily attend churches with white people because they didn't want all of those Black. In some states, it was against the law. In South Carolina and Virginia was against the law to have a closed door with a Black person reading, like literally. So as soon as they emancipated themselves, they created their own institutions, but those were schools and churches. But if you notice, right, aside from the Second Baptist, you'll go to a lot of churches and it'll be like, Nazareth Community Church, formerly Second Baptist. It'll be, Missionary Baptist Church, formerly Second Baptist. And the reason those churches are all those formerly churches were churches that changed their names during the era when they started burning down Black churches, because they would know that it was the Black church because it was the second. And so if you put a second on there, your church might get burned down. This is the thing that we had to avoid. And not because they didn't want us singing songs and preaching and worshiping, but the churches were the center of education, political action, fundraising. And that's why I think people confuse in every book or everything I do, I always make sure to talk about the Black church. And I think people conflate that with religion and Christianity, and that's not it. The Black church, for the most part, was not a religious institution. Like, religion was part of it, just like, I don't know if you went to a school that was created by a religious institution like a college. My sister went to Morris College. It was, I think, an AME college. But I don't know if they prayed any harder at the school. Like it was just that was the organization who founded the school, and the Black church was an institution that was. I mean, it didn't really have anything a lot to do with religion. It was a institution about organizing, about political action. It was where people were educated. It was about social service, and that is the institution, right? That a lot of us, a lot of us are missing because nothing has come up to replace that. I was talking to someone. I think one of the first uh, podcasts we did on Contraband Camp was talking about the Black voting rate decline because of the lack of uh, people going to church. No, like this younger generation doesn't go to church, and I don't think they got to be religious, but it is a product of like the lower voting rates are a product of the turning away from that institution that was the center of political action. Now, I also think that it is also the product of voter suppression. One of the things that happened under George Bush. So when I was in college, all the Qs, all the Deltas, all the AKAs, the Eastern Stars, every community organization, one of the easiest things you could do is just register people to vote. Everybody did a voter registration drive, right? Go to the mall, go to Walmart, stand outside, ask people if they're registered to vote, go to a church event, register people to vote. And in the 2000s, they made that illegal. Right. Like I could just go to the registrar's office, get a bunch of voter registration forms and have people fill them out. In the 2000s, this is what people overlook about the George Bush administration. They did it and they started doing it in two ways. One is that you started needing like someone at the registrar's office or a witness to witness you signing it. And the other thing that they started doing is saying, there's like the swear thing. You had to swear at the bottom of it. And then they just made it illegal. You can't turn in all of these voter registration forms. And the reason how they did that was they started suing Black organizations if one of the forms was wrong. And the liability itself, again, they not afraid of the Qs or the Deltas. They afraid of y'all. The liability is what made these organizations realize like we got to be really careful. They kept doing it, and then they eventually outlawed it. That's why they created that term ballot harvesting and created those voter drop box. It was because Black people were organizing politically. Again, every time we create these institutions, every time we do for ourselves, they burn down the schools, they burn down the churches, they stop you from registering to vote, right? Because they're afraid of y'all. And that's the thing that we have to realize. Like there's a good reason they're afraid of y'all. And that's because, hold on for a second. Hold on for a second. We might have a guest trying to get in. She says she's trying to join, but I don't see how, like I've invited her. And I don't see her trying to join. So I don't know. Maybe she'll try again. Somebody says she's trying to join. But again, they're afraid of y'all. They're afraid of me, you, not Don King exposing anything on that the Trump administration has done. You're afraid that you're going to get activated. Because you see what happened when y'all got activated? They retreated. They got scared. Again, I'm sorry, Don King. I apologize to Don King. Like, it's just like, I think if y'all wouldn't have mentioned it after I said it the first time, it probably wouldn't keep happening. But I really feel like they need to arrest Don King now, so that all of this will make sense to somebody in the future. Like, there's going to be somebody who pulls this up in 20 days or 20 years and says, "Man, they arrested Don King too? Damn, that's messed up. All he did was help Mike Tyson. I mean, he stole some money from Ali and Tyson, but what did Don King do?" We talking about Don King, but Don Lemon, y'all. Two different people, but kind of the same person, just on two different sides of the political spectrum. When you think about it. But yeah, so this is what we have to remember. This is what we have to remember about this era, right? Like, when you see all of this authoritarian, like, chest flexing, you got to know that the reason that they're doing that is because they're afraid of you. I mean, if you are from like any kind of neighborhood, the dude who's talking the loudest is the one who's least ready to fight. That's why he's talking the loudest, right? That's the same with this Trump administration. They ain't gonna do shit. Just like that dude who's talking the loudest. He's using his power to suppress not even his political enemies, right? The truth tellers. People who they know can empower and inspire and coalesce a coalition like you guys. That's why Contraband Camp exists. Because what does any of this matter if we don't share it with each other? Someone says, if white people, and I'm white, are going to continue to claim that black people are so dangerous that cops have to shoot them in the back, or no, I'm living while black, then they have to admit that white people are inferior to them. I think white people, here's the thing, right? All the stuff that I talk about, black people generally know and white people generally don't. Like, remember when like white people a few years ago started finding out about Black Wall Street, about Tulsa, and like it was so commonly known in Black America that like it was record labels named Black Wall Street, right? The gang's record label was Black Wall. It was just a common phrase. It was little strip malls in black neighborhood called Black Wall Street. It was a thing that everybody knew about. And when you talk about police brutality, so there are a lot of white people who refuse to believe like what black people know now. We know now that it is an objective fact that police disproportionately abuse, shoot, and kill black people. Right? They use more force when they stop them. They stop them more often. We don't even have to debate that anymore. Right? It is a fact. And there are a lot of white people who still refuse to believe it. And even those who accept it only accepted it like when they start seeing these cell phone videos. And I say that to say there is no other way to put this. White people in this specific area and in a lot of areas, white people are dumb. Like they're literally objectively dumber about police brutality than black people, about how police work than black people. We know they ain't solving no crimes. The objective facts for generations, black people have known an objective fact better than white people. That is 100% true, right? So, again, back to the origin of this conversation. There is no need to argue about that. You cannot convince the people of the thing that you know objectively, that researchers and scientists and sociologists and criminologists have told the world. Black people knew it before the internet, before we saw the data. Martin Luther King was saying it in the I Have a Dream speech. It is a specific subject. When it comes to policing in America, there is a thing that Black people knew better than the rest of America. The same thing is true with a lot of other stuff. Like, so when you talk about protests, when you talk about these protests, I think that people don't understand that all of these tactics are tactics that originated with Black people. Like, all these marches, all of these, what they call nonviolent protests, this strategy of mass movements from the anti-lynching era to now, right? The strategies are something that we gave to this country. I'm not saying y'all acting like Black people. What I'm saying is, when it comes to this authoritarian regime, right, and overturning it, Black people in America, Black Americans, are the only people in the history of the world to overthrow a fascist government without without violence or without a military force. The only ones. Nobody else has ever done it. Nobody. So this is a thing we know better. Don King and Don Lemon know better than the rest of the world, right? And we know that, like, what that fear is. Like, the people in Selma knew that, hey, all we got to do is just go out there and they're going to be scared of us. They knew that all of those state troopers, all of those armies, all of those National Guardsmen, the governor of Alabama, the KKK in Mississippi, the Night Riders in South Carolina, they knew those people were cowards. They knew it. It was an objective fact. All those people were burning down those churches. Those churches didn't stand in rubble. They built them back because they knew the people would come get some. They knew why they did it. They did it to scare y'all. Right? And they weren't scared. They rebuilt those churches. They didn't stop going to school. They created all of those historically Black institutions. I mean, just think about the fact that in whatever you believe that slave literacy rate was by 1900, like 2 generations, it was almost equal to the white literacy rate, which is wild. Like, I put it on Twitter. You can look it up on Twitter. Like, when World War One and during World War Two started, right, which is the origin of like SATs, right? You can read articles with army officials complaining, like, "Oh man, like, we got to do something because the white people in the rural South can't read." Now think about what I just told you. They were taking our tax dollars and creating schools just for the white people. We were building our own schools, and the white people could not read. Like, the white literacy rate in the South, like, they had to lower the standards for the army to get enough soldiers to fight in World War I and World War II. And don't take my word for it. You can go read the articles. And that was the first DEI. Because remember, the army was still segregated, right? So they could get black soldiers, but it wasn't enough of us. And then we couldn't intermingle with those pure white boys. And the reason they had that problem was because of their fear. Like, it hurt them. They were less educated. They were objectively, again, this is not an assessment or an opinion. They were objectively dumber because they were attacking us. Right? And that is the thing that we have to realize. Like, they are such cowards that they arrested Don Lemon for covering a protest in a church. Notice I didn't say Don King. They arrested Don Lemon for covering a protest in a church. And it's the same administration that pardoned all of those people for running up into the Capitol. It doesn't make sense. The only way it makes sense is if you factor in whiteness. That's the only way. Slaves couldn't read makes sense. That's the only way that, the only slave that could read wouldn't teach the other black people. That's the only way that the black people don't value education. That's the only way you can justify that, put all this money into police that don't solve crimes and don't keep you safe. That's the only way you can justify this immigration stuff. That's the only way you can justify America, is if you realize that the people who make the rules, the people who have the privilege, the people who have the power are objectively dumber and they're cowards. That's the only way. So that's nothing to fear. That's why they got to put all of those people in dirty D vests on the streets. Because what they're afraid of ain't y'all shooting at them. What they're afraid of is not some lone, because that doesn't happen. Like people don't kill cops generally. It is remarkably safe to be a cop. I'm serious. Like, Uber driving is more dangerous than being a police officer. But the dirty D vest is to scare you. That gun is to scare you. That raid on Don Lemon and Don King, fingers crossed, is to scare you. It's not to persecute Don Lemon. It's not to, arrest an immigrant. It's to scare y'all. And every now and then, when they see y'all ain't scared, they got to shoot one of us in the face. They got to put one of us behind bars. Because they hope that'll work. But the one thing we know is that of all the people on this planet, we already beat that. We did it. And we can do it again. So, thank y'all for joining this episode of the Wake Up Call. We'll see y'all, we see you next Friday. And of course, we'll see you in camp.